Check.
That was an interesting move by my opponent. I should have seen it coming. Robin, the boy wonder. As a young growing boy, this has been a learning lesson. Always be ready for your next move when your opponent surprises you. So, why is Batman playing chess? And why am I wearing a Batman mask and trying to sound and speak like Batman? No, I'm not going out trick-or-treating, nor am I attending a Halloween costume party after we finish taping this sermon, nor am I trying to comply with new masking protocols involving safety with our online services. No, I think the mask is appropriate because it reminds me of our theme today, overcoming opposition. You see, as a young boy, my favorite superhero was Batman. Batman and his sidekick, Robin, the boy wonder. Always intrigued me that a dude in his late 20s was portraying the boy wonder, Robin. But nevertheless, Batman was my favorite superhero. Fighting those villains and their sinister plots and doing everything he could to fight crime and protect the good citizens of the city of Gotham. You know, as boys, my two brothers and me, we were not allowed to watch classic TV like the Three Stooges. Apparently, we mimicked the Three Stooges, and because of that, our parents banned us from watching the Three Stooges. Can you imagine? Blatant censorship back in the 1960s. But we were allowed to watch Batman. 2 nights back to back in the 1960s. We're talking the Adam West version of Batman, the original Batman, not the later animation series or the movies that got out into the theaters. No, we're talking the original Batman, 2 nights back to back, and it was wonderful as these villains would have their sinister schemes, their very deceitful plots, and as they would carry out criminal activities, trying to put the citizens of Gotham in jeopardy. But it was always Batman and Robin to the rescue. They were quite a group of villains. Names like the Joker, the Riddler, the Penguin, Mr. Freeze, and of course the cunning Catwoman. Actually, I think she's responsible for my dislike of cats. But these characters, one of them would always show up every week, and with their gang they would commit a crime in Gotham. And sure enough, in the first episode it was Batman and Robin to the rescue. But invariably, Batman and Robin would get into trouble, and the first episode would close with a cliffhanger. Batman and Robin would always be in danger of losing their lives. But at the start of the next evening's episode, Batman and Robin would always escape. It was always far-fetched, but good fun. And I remember the fight scenes. There were these silly captions, cloud captions over the fight scene. Kaboom! Kajam! All these kinds of wonderful fight scenes going on. But inevitably, Batman and Robin would triumph over the enemies, and Gotham would be restored to a sense of safety and security. Hey, there were some really good lessons coming out of that Batman show. Some lifelong lessons, some incredibly good quotes. Like the episode when Batman says to Robin, every crime fighter needs to eat, especially you, Robin. You're a growing boy and you need your nutrition. I mean, that was a classic line. I mean, one of those memorable lines that will go down in TV history. But seriously, there were other more important lessons, like learning to be aware, learning to utilize resources, and learning to be resilient, especially in the face of opposition. Now, when it comes to chess, there are many lessons to be learned as well when it comes to overcoming opposition. Believe it or not, when I was in high school, I was a member of our school's chess team. I know what you're thinking. You are thinking, those on the chess team tend to be nerds. Okay, don't go there in your thoughts. I was an exception, but I wasn't a very good player. Knew a couple of the guys on the team. It was a good social outing. But a few years later, I hadn't played for a while. It was at a children's camp. I was the speaker of the week, and the kids that week were really into chess. And I remember a young boy, he had come over with his family from China, had only been in Canada for about a year, and he was like a young chess master. And he challenged me to a chess match. And if you can believe it, I beat him in about 4 moves. Total miracle. I had no strategy, no plan. It just kind of happened. For the rest of the week, the kids regarded me as a chess superstar. But he challenged me 3 other times, and I lost badly. So began a long losing streak in chess. I can't remember the last time I won a chess match. I tend in the game of chess just to wing it. I will inevitably make a careless mistake or 2 or 3 and lose the game. But I still appreciate the strategic maneuvers, the strategy, and the competition that you might find in a game of chess. When I think of overcoming opposition, and I think back to those chess games, and I think to the fictional TV series Batman, I realize there are limits. You see, overcoming opposition is a real-life matter, and we really need a real-life example or model that will inspire us and give us valuable insights when it comes to dealing with opposition. And I think one of the very best examples, someone who is an ideal model for us, is Nehemiah. And we've been looking at Nehemiah's memoirs over the last few weeks, and today I want us to look again at Nehemiah and a strategy for overcoming opposition. We've been looking at various building bricks in our series called Rebuild from Nehemiah. We've looked at the building block of prayer. We've considered the building block of leadership. We looked at teamwork. Last week, Josh introduced us to the building block of, or brick of generosity. And 2 weeks ago, we introduced, Josh touched on it last week, and I'm going to develop it even more today, this building brick that we call overcoming opposition. I would argue that in the rebuilding of the wall of Jerusalem, the greatest challenge was the opposition to it. And to me, one of the keys to the success of the rebuilding of the wall of Jerusalem was an ability to overcome and triumph over the opposition. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we saw that the target of the attacks and opposition were the group of people. It was the Jewish people in general. Last week, Josh touched on some of the internal conflicts and opposition. Today, as we move into chapter 6, we're going to discover that the opposition and the attacks are very personal. Nehemiah himself is the target of the opposition. Now, keeping with our chess theme, we're going to look at 3 different moves of the opponents, 3 different strategies that they deployed in attacking Nehemiah. We see this recorded in chapter 6. The first move I'm going to call the "oh no" proposal. Did you get that? The "oh no" proposal. In our second move, we will label it the open letter plot. And then in our final section, we'll look at the move and call it Operation Intimidation. Now that's a lot of old words. Overcoming opposition, the "oh no" proposal, the open letter plot, and then finally Operation Intimidation. So if you've got your Bible, as we look at some further insights on overcoming opposition, please turn to Nehemiah chapter 6. Nehemiah 6, verse 1. When word came to Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies, kind of like the Joker, the Riddler, and the Penguin. When word came to them that I had rebuilt the wall and not a gap was left in it, though up to that time I had not set the doors and the gates, so the job is almost done. He's almost finished. Sanballat and Geshem sent me this message. Come, let us meet together in one of the villages on the plain of Ono. But they were scheming to harm me. So I sent messengers to them with this reply. I'm carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? 4 times they sent me the same message, and each time I gave them the same answer. What strikes me here with this "oh no" proposal is the strategy of the enemies. They're now going after the kingpin. They feel if they can take Nehemiah out of the equation, they will thwart this final stage in the rebuilding of the wall. So they come up with a rather pleasant invitation. Nehemiah, come down to Ono. Ono would have been about 15 miles outside of Jerusalem. Come down, we'll have a little lunch. Sanballat the Samaritan would provide the Samaritan snacks. Geshem the Arab, some rich Arabian coffee. They had it all planned out. But Nehemiah was able to discern whether this was intuition, whether there had been an informant, but he knew that their real intent was that they were scheming to harm Nehemiah. I find it interesting to look at the timing. Did you notice that the wall was almost finished? That sometimes is when we're most vulnerable, when we're in the last lap. At the finish line is where often failure occurs. Look at someone like Solomon, that great hero in the Old Testament, but towards the end of his life, this great builder in Jewish history experienced failure. Maybe Nehemiah was very aware of that, but what they tried to do was pressure him, maybe even at a time of vulnerability. In ministry, we call it the Monday morning blues, where you've maybe appreciated or experienced success over a weekend, but you're vulnerable. You might even let your guard down after some success. So the wall is coming along really, really well. Nehemiah could easily have let his guard down, but he was aware of what was going on. The enemies were trying to pressure him, to wear him down. They were persistent. They kept insisting and insisting again, over and over. Come, meet together with us in the village of Ono. But I really appreciate Nehemiah's response. He said, "Oh no," to "oh no." Did you get that? Oh no. No, I'm not going to oh no. Now, in a very general sense, what I appreciate is Nehemiah had the ability to say no to a meeting. I love Patrick Lenciani's book, Death by Meeting. Maybe you're wired like me, where you've been brought up to believe that if you're invited to a meeting, you have to attend a meeting. But there are some meetings where it's okay to say, oh no, I'm not going to that meeting. For example, where someone wants a collaborative meeting, but they have a very different goal than you might have. I was invited to a meeting recently that was dealing with a social justice issue. It's not that it's a bad issue, but it's not our issue as a community church. I'm glad I was able to say no to that meeting. It's not always a matter of choosing between a bad meeting or a good meeting. Sometimes it's a good meeting, but there's something better that you need to be doing with your time. The other concern is there was no stated agenda to this meeting at ONO. And that, for me, is like a warning signal on the dashboard. If someone invites me to a meeting and there is no agenda, I think, like you, it's just wise to be cautious. What's the purpose? Why are we meeting? And I think Nehemiah was skeptical when he realized there was really no agenda to this meeting. But maybe even a greater concern was a sense of isolation. Nehemiah wasn't invited to come down with some of his men or some of the other Jewish leaders. What they wanted to do was to isolate Nehemiah. They planned to ambush him and do that when he was all by himself. That should be a red flag for us as well. Let's say, for example, that you have a property dispute with your neighbors, and one day your neighbors come over, they ask about your husband, and you say, oh, he's out playing golf. And they say, oh, that's a good time. We know he's so busy, we just want to talk to you a little bit about our property disagreement. That should be a red flag. You should respond, no, I think I'll wait till my husband can be involved in this discussion as well. Or what about when your parents contact you and they say, you know, we're not really crazy about the way you and your wife are raising our grandchildren. Could you come over? But leave your wife behind. We can just talk about some strategies for raising our grandchildren. Now, that should be a red flag. You should go, I'm not sure I even want to talk about it, but if we're going to talk about it, believe me, my wife will be included in that. I've had some difficult counseling with people who are involved maybe in a custody situation with their ex. The ex says, oh, let's just get together and talk about the arrangement and some of the particulars. Unfortunately, I've had to sometimes provide the counsel. You shouldn't be having that meeting just on your own. It may even require that you have a lawyer present. Very important to be careful of that kind of isolation. Reminds me of a young pastor friend of mine who said that he had 2 or 3 people who wanted to meet with him every Monday morning, and he said it was pretty obvious their purpose was to try to threaten him, to try to persuade him into some changes at the church. And my counsel to him was, if you're going to have a meeting with this little concern group, make sure you have an elder or maybe even a couple of elders joining in that kind of meeting with you. So be very careful of that isolation factor. I admire Nehemiah's ability to say no. Technically speaking, he set some boundaries. He put some limitations on where and when he would meet, how frequent he would be subject to any kind of conversation or discourse. I really believe that all of us need to limit the amount of criticism we will take in, even constructive criticism. I'm not prone to receiving criticism of any type right after a sermon. Give me a few days. Give me 3 or 4 days. You might have the most constructive advice possible, but there is a time and a place. In a bigger sense, it's good and healthy to set some boundaries, some parameters, to put on some limitations of your life. As well, Nehemiah is aware of distractions. He sees what's going on. They want to distract him from the greater purpose of finishing the wall. And he sees through that. And he says to them, I've got something greater that needs to be done. Even if this was a friendly meeting, I'm still not going to go because there's a greater objective that I have, which is to finish the wall. So here's the bottom line. And this is something that all of us need to hear. It's okay to say no. There's sometimes the very best thing we can do in certain situations is to say no. Never ever forget Nehemiah's response. He said, "Oh no," to "oh no." So let's look now at the second move that we see from the enemies. We read now at verse 5. These guys are persistent. Then the fifth time. They're not giving up. They're trying to wear him down. Sanballat sent his aide to me with the same message, and in his hand was an unsealed or an open letter, in which was written, "It is reported among the nations, and Geshem says it is true, that you and the Jews are plotting to revolt, and therefore you are building the wall. Moreover, according to these reports, you are about to become their king, and have even appointed prophets to make this proclamation about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now this report will get back to the king, so come, let us meet together." I sent him this reply: "Nothing like what you are saying is happening. You are just making it up out of your mind or head. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking, their hands will get too weak for the work, and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands." What a strategy. This is what I call the open letter plot. It involved rumors, innuendo, gossip. Now, it was an interesting strategy in that they talk about it being reported among the nations. Is that accurate? Likely not. It's like somebody saying, "Oh, everyone is complaining about this." And you do a little investigation and you discover it's the guy, his wife, and their pet dog that constitutes everyone. So we're not sure to what extent it was reported among the nations. I get a kick out of, and Geshem says it's true. Well, yeah, he's a reliable source. Geshem is one of the enemies. He has a vested negative interest in the situation. But what really intrigues me, and it needs to be pointed out about this kind of gossip, is that they weren't wanting to know whether or not it was true. They were trying to coerce Nehemiah into coming to Ono, where they could discuss matters with him. They're kind of saying, well, we're just giving you a heads up, Nehemiah, you need to be aware. But again, Nehemiah, with his sense of discernment, could see through it. And I think for Nehemiah, it was, what is their role in this gossip? They weren't just informants, they were the instigators. They were the ones who were creating it. And what were their motivations in sharing the gossip? Hey, just a real aside here. When it comes to those who are reporting gossip to you, someone comes along and says, "Oh, you need to know, Bill, what they are saying about you." You should always pull back and ask yourself a couple of questions. What is Bill's role in the gossip? Is he neutral to it, or is he right in the middle of it? And what is his motivation? I don't want you to always be looking for sinister motives, but there are some people who share those kinds of reports, but they have ulterior motives. Nehemiah could see through this. So he does something that's very important. Nehemiah realized, like we should realize, that gossip is usually inaccurate, unnecessary, and usually and often vindictive. He could see through it. And Nehemiah gave a very quick response. Now, this is where there's some tension. I read a book just the other day where the author said the most godly men and women just ignore gossip. But Nehemiah shows us another approach. He addresses this. It was a serious charge. This was a rumor of insurrection, that Nehemiah was planning a rebellion against King Artaxerxes. It was a serious accusation, and Nehemiah knew that he had to put an end to it. But his reply was very brief, it was very terse, and very much to the point. Come on, guys, I know you're just making it up. I know your purpose is to try to get me down to, oh no, where you're going to be doing something nasty to me. So Nehemiah called them out on it. A brief reply, he prayed about it, and I think when it comes to personal attacks, we get the discernment to understand what's going on as we are close to God in prayer. He gives us the spiritual enlightenment and the insights we need to be aware of what's going on. But very quickly we get the idea that Nehemiah is back to this rebuilding project. He's working again on his priority, which is rebuilding the wall. Just some practical comments about gossip. Someone comes to you and says something like, "Oh, can you keep a secret?" Maybe you should just respond, "No, I can't," and see what kind of further attempts come to provide some gossip. Or someone says, "I can't wait to tell you some juicy information about Mary." And maybe you should respond, "Well, I can wait." Or someone says, "I'm not really sure if I should share this information about Becky." Maybe your response should be, "Well, maybe you shouldn't." Or one of my favorites, someone says, "You won't believe what people are saying about Jack." And your response maybe is, "Oh, that they're saying that Jack is such a nice guy and only a real jerk would say or share anything bad about him." Now, these are just a variety of responses, and as you can tell, though I've heard the expression good gossip, in the Bible, gossip, rumors, innuendo, libel, slander are always viewed very negatively. We should avoid participating in it, but like Nehemiah, we need to be ready to address it. But in an appropriate way, not to dwell on it, not to be obsessed by it, but to be pointed and deal with it and then move on to important things. So the third and final move I call Operation Intimidation. I'll read from verse 10 to the end of the chapter. Note the times where the word intimidation is used. One day I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, the son of Mertabel, who was shut in at his home. He said, "Let us meet in the house of God inside the temple, and let us close the temple doors, because men are coming to kill you. By night they are coming to kill you." But I said, "Should a man like me run away? Or should someone like me go into the temple to save his life? I will not go." I realized that God had not sent him, but that he had prophesied against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He had been hired to intimidate me so that I would commit a sin by doing this, and they would give me a bad name to discredit me. God, remember Tobiah and Sanballat because of what they have done. Remember also the prophet Noadiah and how she and the rest of the prophets have been trying to intimidate me. So the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul in 52 days. When all our enemies heard about this, all the surrounding nations were afraid and they lost their self-confidence because they realized that this work had been done with the help of our God. Also in those days, the nobles of Judah were sending many letters to Tobiah, and replies from Tobiah kept coming to them. For many in Judah were under oath to him, since he was son-in-law to Shekiah, son of Era, and his son Jehonan had married the daughter of Mesullam, son of Berechiah. Moreover, they kept reporting to me his good deeds, and then telling him what I said. And Tobiah sent letters to intimidate me. And I'm not going to dwell on Operation Intimidation. The dictionary definition, though, of intimidate means to frighten or to scare. May be appropriate when we think of this being Halloween time. But that was the purpose of the enemies. They tried their best to get Nehemiah to Ono, where they could ambush him. Now they were out to get him in the temple. Now it's kind of twofold. I look at Shemaiah as being a backstabber. He was a fellow who should have been, as a prophet of Judah, on Nehemiah's side. But this prophet had become like a hired hitman. He was out to trap Nehemiah. And Nehemiah could see through it. Whether it was through his intuition again or through an informant, but he realized that this prophet had been hired by his enemies, Tobiah and Sanballat. And again, I'm not asking anyone to be super cynical, but when it comes to opposition, just be cautious and careful who you trust. In this case, the prophet wanted to have Nehemiah run and hide in the temple. Nehemiah said, well, that will display a complete lack of courage to the people. But even more seriously, this prophet wanted Nehemiah to enter into the temple, something that he could not do on his own because he wasn't a priest or a Levite, and it would be committing a sin. This would put his name in disgrace. It would be actually regarded as a very negative thing by the Jewish people. But again, all of this was to try to scare Nehemiah into doing things that he should not do. Be careful who you trust. Remember a number of years ago in Toronto, an elder came to me and he said, John, received kind of a negative letter about some of your ministry. And I thought, great. And you know how it is. I thought, okay, I bet you came from this person or that person, maybe that person. And then I was kind of shocked to discover that the letter had come from someone I regarded as a pretty good friend. It was a sense of betrayal, a real sense of disappointment. The letter itself wasn't really a good letter. The concerns weren't that legitimate. Fortunately, we were able to deal with those issues and there was a sense of reconciliation. But I sure learned a lesson, and you need to know it too. Be a trusting person, absolutely. But be careful, be cautious. You never know when somebody might stab you in the back. And our enemy, our ultimate enemy, is one who is very clever and very deceitful and has wicked ways of dealing with us. I'm not going to say a whole lot more about Tobiah. He's what I call the ultimate sore loser. He would not accept the fact that the wall had been rebuilt, and he's like the person who loses a chess game and says, okay, double or nothing, or let's just keep playing, and we'll see as we move through the rest of Nehemiah that Tobiah would remain a real thorn in the side of Nehemiah. So again, on this point, Operation Intimidation, what I love about Nehemiah was he put his trust in God. He refused to be intimidated. And with God's help and with his strength, he stood up to the opposition. And then the remarkable fact is that the wall was completely finished, and in 52 days. In spite of these great obstacles, in spite of fierce opposition, with God's help, Nehemiah and the people were able to accomplish something very significant. It reminds us of Jesus. We looked at this verse a couple of weeks ago. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men. Everyone was crying out against Jesus. Jesus, stop going to Calvary. You can call angels to rescue you. But Jesus was determined to persevere. And we need to consider his example, what he fully accomplished for us on the cross, so that we will not grow weary, so that we will not lose heart. The fact of the matter is, Jesus has won the victory over sin and death and the devil, and we need to celebrate that. Nehemiah won a great victory when they successfully rebuilt the wall. And just to think, in only 52 days. If Nehemiah could overcome opposition, you and me, we can overcome those who attack us, those who unfairly criticize us. We can win these battles in life. And finally, remember Batman. Checkmate. Game over.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here this morning, and our thanks to Pastor John for that great sermon and for that wonderful Batman impersonation. I want to highlight a couple of things for you before we close our time with a brief word of prayer. This Friday, you would have received an email from the office giving you all of the details about the shoebox packing party. Now, you've heard us talk about this for quite a while on the service videos, at the gathering, and with a couple of emails. You can now register. All the information you need to register was in that email. You can register to be part of the packing party on November 9th or November 10th. Again, if you did not receive that email, please connect with the church office, or you can connect with Chris McDonald as well. Coming up near the end of the month is another opportunity to put our love into action, and that is the virtual Santa Run, a 5K run that will help create Christmas memories, an opportunity to teach your children and grandchildren about generosity, raise a little money for the Byron Cares Food Bank, and get a pretty sweet Christmas medallion. For more information or to register for that, you can visit byroncommunitychurch.com. Would you bow your heads now as we close our time together with prayer? Papa God, we want to thank you for this time that we've had, for this opportunity that we've had to carve time out of our day, out of our weeks, to open up your scriptures and turn to you, Lord. We thank you for Pastor John and through speaking through him this morning. Father, as we begin a new week and a new month of remembrance, we ask that we would remember others, that we would love others, that in all that we say and do, Lord, that we would reflect your glory, reflect your love, and reflect the true light that you give to our neighbors. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.